Well, freelance journalist Laura Walubengo joins us now to discuss the undercurrents that forced President Ruto to withdraw the controversial finance bill and alternatives for the government in sourcing funds to grow the Kenyan economy. Good afternoon, Laura. Very warm welcome to Newsday. And I'll get straight into my first question, which is around the situation on the ground today. Of course, we know that there is a massive protest scheduled for today. What is the situation on the ground? Is military deployment still in effect? Are we seeing army officers on the streets? And what is the general energy of the environment?
So thank you very much for having me on. The protest is still going on. We have hundreds of people on the streets, and not only in Nairobi. We have them in Nairobi, in Kilifi towards the coast, in Mombasa. We also have them in the western region of Kenya, that's towns like Kisumu, Kakamega. We did have protesters coming out quite early this morning, about 8, 9 a.m. However, most of the state installations, which is a state house here in Nairobi, and also the state lodges in the different towns, for example, in Kakamega, with a heavy police presence and military also there with their lorries, just trying to make sure that there are barriers that will prevent the protesters from getting close to these establishments. And these were set up quite early in the morning. So there have been protesters on the street. And at the same time, the military is also there just to make sure that they do not, there's no destruction of property. There is a bit of tear gas that has been witnessed within the Nairobi Central Business District, because as we had some protesters going towards State House, there were other protesters just in the city center headed towards Parliament. And I think there has been some cases of injuries, that some policemen have been injured, but as of now, fortunately, no casualties as of today.
Well, thank you, Laura, for that update. Now let's talk about how this withdrawal has probably affected Ruto's political capital and the public's perception of his leadership.
Well, initially, when the protests took place on Tuesday, that was the third day of protests and by far the most violent, there was a destruction in Parliament. There was a fire in Nairobi's Parliament buildings and also in the City Council and the Supreme Court buildings. And because of that, later on that evening, President Ruto deployed the military and said that, there should not be a violation of the Constitution. The protests, however, there were some, I wouldn't call them, they're called abductions. There were some activists who were quite vocal on social media that had gone missing. And because of that, it was felt that the president did not really read the room quite accurately. And so later on, which is yesterday, he backtracked on his hard stance and this time said that, okay, I concede, I will withdraw the finance bill in full, and then hopefully we can have some dialogue going forward. I think the deputy president also sort of blamed the intelligence service for not being able to provide proper information to the president and making him look like he was not really on top of things. And so the sentiment right now is that the leadership does not necessarily understand what the young Kenyan goes through. And so that is the reason why the protests still continue today. They want to physically see that the bill has been withdrawn in Parliament, and also just see that, okay, we need you to know that apart from the finance bill, there are other issues that we feel are not constitutional. For example, there's some offices of the president's wife, the first lady, and also the vice president's wife. They have gotten allocations in the finance bill, which the Kenyan citizens are saying it's unconstitutional and it should be rescinded. So there is that sentiment that he probably just needs to listen a lot more.
All right. Now, what's happening with the members of parliament? Because it seems there's also a lot of sentiment that they should also take their share of the accountability, specifically those ones who voted yes. Will there be any backlash towards them alone? If Ruto is going to go down, if I may use that term, is he going to go down with his MPs? Or, what does the political landscape look like in the short term?
The political landscape is actually up in the air right now because the youth are not putting all the responsibility just on the president. They say that everybody needs to carry their own cross. So there were some unfortunate incidents where one of the MPs in Eldoret had his establishment raided by some citizenry there. And so there is the personal attack where each of the constituents are trying to hold their members of parliament to account, saying, if you voted yes, you need to say why you voted yes, and you need to assure us that you have our best interests at heart, because that now it just seemed that this is what the president was saying. And so there's a number of MPs that voted yes, and those who voted no are the ones who are the heroes of the day, so to speak. So all MPs are looking for ways. Some have actually come outright and apologized to their constituents, saying that, forgive us, this is a wrong decision that we made, but we're going to listen to you more closely going forward. And so that it's a bit of shaky ground. It's something that they've not really had to deal with, considering that these youth who are coming out have no political bias. They're not aligned to any political party, but they are just saying that this is what we want, and we want a leadership that listens to us and does what is best for us.
Noted, Laura. Now, what alternative revenue sources could the government realistically pursue without sparking any further protests?
I would say, just based on even what the president said yesterday, they have to really cut down on spending. There's been a very heavy spending on travel that just happened this year, and that is one of the areas that has been pinpointed. There also needs to be a lot of, I think, the Constituency Development Fund is also one area that the government said they would identify as a place to siphon resources from. And I mean, that will bring some issues, because the Constituency Development Fund is meant for each of the different constituencies and development projects within those constituencies, which might suffer. But at this point, it's austerity measures are actually the only way to go, because there is no other form of taxation. Although one of the biggest repayments that Kenya was going after, the Eurobond, was finally completed last week. So hopefully there will be some reduced pressure there, where the government will be able to divert existing resources and also, I guess, also focus on the Kenya Revenue Authority's collection methods, just trying to see where you can tighten the belt. But there's no external source of income per se.
Okay, great. Now, I just want to draw some parallels between Kenya and Nigeria right now, because one of the first things that William Ruto did do when he came into office was to remove the fuel subsidy, which is something that we relate with quite heavily over here in Nigeria. Now, I believe that at some point he had to make a U-turn on that. What is the sentiment towards subsidies from both the government and from the people? Do you think we'll see more subsidies removing, even though the IMF has required that subsidies be eliminated?
I really doubt that. I think the subsidies that are there right now will stay in place, because the government has to jealously guard whatever income they're receiving right now. So I do anticipate that the subsidies will stay in place. However, there is a bit of pressure that came out when the strength of the dollar to the shilling, it weakened a little bit. And so there is also a bit of breathing space there when it comes to the fuel subsidies. But I do not think that that will be one area that will be reduced. I think things will stay as they are, as the government looks at ways to actually cut some of their spending.
And from your perspective, Laura, how can the government rebuild public trust when it comes to economic policies, especially after this fresh controversy?
I think the government can rebuild their trust in the citizenry simply by just doing what they say they're going to do. Because one of the largest areas of discontent was that the promises that were given during the campaign period have not been fulfilled. We do not have free education. As it is, the health costs are rising. And so when you give a finance bill that looks to tax treatment on cancer, there's certain things that the government needs to do to backtrack on sentiments that make them seem extremely insensitive to how Kenyans are faring on right now. I mean, there is a health crisis. There's less money in people's pockets, but foodstuffs, the prices are going up. There was a fertilizer scandal where, fine, the government says that we have subsidized the price of fertilizer, but there was substandard fertilizer that was being distributed by the various organizations. So one thing the government has to do is actually put their money where their mouth is and do exactly what they say they're going to do and not play to the plenary, which has been, I think, a style of politics that a lot of countries in Africa are known to take advantage of.
Right. Now, just also trying to forecast where the situation is going to go. I was listening to one of the opposition MPs this morning who was saying that he feels that President Ruto should dissolve parliament and call for fresh elections. Sounds a little bit far-fetched, but do you think that this is, something that can gain momentum? Do you think that from chanting Ruto must go today, that this can become a movement that says, you know what, let's end it all, let's go back to election? And what are Raila Odinga saying and former President Uhuru Kenyatta? What do they all have to say about the current situation?
Well, the former President Uhuru Kenyatta came out and spoke against the violent way that the police was dispelling demonstrators earlier this week and last week. And that was what he had to say, and saying, violence is not the answer. We need to look for a way to encourage dialogue. And I think those are the things that have not really been said. Raila Odinga has only commended the youth who've come out to fight for their rights, saying it's encouraging to see that young people actually know what the Constitution says, actually know that they have a right to protest and to picket and try to show their displeasure so that they can get some sort of reaction from the government. Sorry, I missed out on the first bit that the first bit of your question.
Do you think there's any likelihood at all of Parliament being dissolved and us going to a snap election?
I don't think so. Simply because as Parliament stands, they are sort of united behind the president, and if there's anything that should happen, I think the young people will have to come up with a way of politically trying to see what their options are within the law to be able to sort of take back the power, so to speak. Although when it comes to MPs, there has been word of impeaching MPs individually. As it is right now, our electoral body does not have the capacity to carry out even a snap election. So that is one institution that needs to be looked at. There are various different factors that need to be considered before a snap election is actually a reality. I don't think that's going to happen.
Okay, well, Laura, you touched on this earlier on, saying that perhaps we saw the way the president handled this situation based on him not having all the information to act on it appropriately. But I'm wondering if you think that international investors or organizations might have played any role in the president's decision to withdraw the bill.
It's not clear if they did play a direct role in that. I know there was some statements issued, of course, by the U.S. administration, statements issued by diplomats, the European under the European Union, but I'm not aware of any direct pressure. I think most of the pressure really came from discord on the streets. And if there's any evidence against that, it has not landed on my table.
All right, Laura Walubengo, live from Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you so much for these valuable insights into the situation. We pray that peace prevails and that a solution to all these issues can be found speedily. Thanks again.